Welcome to the second episode of the Maveric Banking Edge podcast series, hosted by P. Venkatesh, Director, Thought Leadership, Maveric Systems. Joining him today is Philip Dutton, CEO and founder, Solidatus.
Welcome to the next edition of the podcast on regulatory reporting. In this podcast, we would focus on data lineage. In order to go through this, we have with us Philip Dutton, co-founder and CEO of Solidatus, the award-winning data lineage and visualization platform. Philip had been a very committed data management technologist and has worked on several transformation engagements across industry segment and firmly believes that the data lineage part within the data engineering space is something which could be revolutionized and therefore had gone to set up, along with his colleagues, the Solidatus platform. Welcome on board, Phil.
Thank you very much, Venkatesh. Pleasure to be here.
Welcome, Philip. See, Phil, before I really wanted to ask you, there is a lot of interest on the regulatory reporting side from banks across the world. And today's edition, we will focus on the financial services, especially on the regulatory reporting part. Is this interest in data lineage coming from the increased supervision by the supervisors, or the shift from forbearance to penalties by the regulators, or it is aided by the technology developments around data, which has made data lineage somewhat feasible for people to attempt at?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think for me, when thinking about it, I really look to the why. Why do the regulators think about lineage? Why do they want lineage? Why does anyone want lineage? And really, for me, this is, the regulators don't trust that we have a good handle on the data that we are supplying them, right? They don't trust that we're able to report accurately. They don't report that consistently. And this has been borne out from numerous examples in industry where there's been failures. 2007, 2008, obviously a huge crash because of data that wasn't able to be trusted and connected. So the pressure from regulators is there because they want us to improve what we've been doing. And I think this comes back to, in banking and in financial services, really we've always built for, the quickest time to market, the shortest path to profit. We haven't been building for a sustainable ecosystem, a well-designed, well-architected ecosystem. Now, we've had the challenge that technology presents, which is it's always changing, and so the technology changes very frequently, and we're trying to keep up with that change at the same time as deliver on projects for clients. I think if we looked at another industry and compared and said, what happens if we were able to build buildings without getting the blueprints checked by an engineer or by the council before we were allowed to build the building. We don't have to submit architectural diagrams to the regulators. Maybe we should, because at the moment the lineage for regulators is really kind of that snapshot of what's already happened, not what we're about to build or what we're attempting to build. So we're kind of putting the cart before the horse almost. We're building first, and then we're showing that we understand what we've built later. But the lineage really should supply much more than just that evidence of understanding. It should be the blueprint for what we're designing, and so I think there's a number of factors. But for the regulators, it really is: can you evidence control? Can you evidence that you have a firm grasp of understanding on the data that you have, being reported?
I understand that, Phil, but still that the other part of the question in terms of whether there has been developments around the technologies in and around data engineering, which has enabled data lineage to move forward.
Yeah, no, and you're exactly right there. Sorry, two-part question, single-part answer. So the second part is 100%. I think in the past we have very much been building point solutions. So we have a request to provide this, so we need to quickly build something, to show this. It wasn't a professionally designed endeavor. The landscape of a lot of the tooling that currently existed in the market prior to Solidaris was designed against a world that no longer exists. It was designed for a world which was very simple, where we had very few applications, very few systems, very little data, very little regulations. And so a very simple world. The world we now exist in is a very, very complex world. And so technology has had to evolve, and the reason that Solidaris exists is because that complexity was no longer possible to be created in those tools and used by a technologist, a data professional, or the business. And so really there has been some fundamental shifts in technology which have enabled us to really do more in the lineage space. Graph technology has come a significant way to enable us to be able to connect the dots, connect up the different data sets, connect up the different business requirements, the regulations. Also, the visualization is critical. You've got to be able to see something to understand it. If it's just put into a repository, you don't get that understanding. You really need to see it in front of your eyes to be able to make those logical links and have confidence. So yes, the technology has changed dramatically. And so the lineage space, and I believe Solidaris is one of the leaders in this space, has really enabled organizations to do much more than they previously were able to. We're not just about evidencing a snapshot. So it's not just studying for the exam. It's making sure that you have, a sustainable blueprint for the regulators to see not only what you did yesterday, but what you did today, and now what you're going to do in the future. So we are actually thinking about, making lineage more of a design pattern rather than just a document pattern.
Understood. See, Phil, just one request. We don't want this session to be promoting a product.
Sure.
And we want that to be focused on the end-using segment because those are the audience for this podcast. Just, right. I know it is tough, but please keep a check on those. Okay. Now, see, Phil, continuing from there, I did hear in one of your earlier podcasts that you mentioned one of the significant benefits of the data lineage is to forewarn what is to come. And it actually creates an environment where you can simulate and see how the changes are going to impact. Can you actually go into little detail in describing them as far as the reporting is concerned?
Yeah, 100%. So I think the critical piece here is that impact analysis. What we want to identify is across my complex system landscape that is not ever standing still, that is in constant change, that if we make changes in any of the systems, in any of the ETLs, in any of the underlying data stores, that we can have confidence that what we will report to the regulators will still be accurate, will still be complete, will still be consistent. And so being able to see an impact, so pre-design what you're going to change and then make sure that it doesn't impact the regular report is critical, because if we don't, we get into the age-old problem of someone makes a change to a system, they test it in a local ecosystem, 1 hop, 2 hops away from their, the data source creation, and then they push it into production. It passes all the tests, and once it hit production, the regulatory reports then break because they didn't track that data all the way downstream. Something as simple as a data type change or a precision in a rate might cause significant consequence. And so you really have to assess the impact before in order to ensure that we're not breaching our regulatory obligation. So I think this is a critical piece of the lineage play is not just, as I said, that snapshot of today. It's making sure that the technologists who are changing the landscape understand what their change will impact all the way down to the consumers. And it might be a regulator, but it might be your customer. If the balance of your savings account changed to be one, decimal place incorrect, how much of an uproar would there be? If every customer lost 10,000 off their account or 100,000 off their account, it would be in every paper across the world that a bank had done that. And so it's not just the regulators that are concerned by this, it's also your customers.
Understood, Phil. See, take even regulatory reporting. It is quite pervasive. It covers most of the business lines. It covers the front, middle, and back office systems of the bank. And therefore, it is quite massive, even if you were to implement this. Where do you start? Given that it would traverse the entire length and breadth of the organization, the challenge becomes where do you actually start and how do you make progress from there?
Yeah, no, this is again that age-old question of how do we actually make this possible and how do we make this sustainable? And I think really our approach has been a little bit too broad in what we were trying to do. So we would always focus on trying to document, catalog, create lineage for the entire organization. As you mentioned, front office, middle office, back office. Now, for a regulatory report, the regulatory report has specific purpose and it has specific fields within that report which have specific purpose. So rather than trying to do lineage for the entire organization, what we should be focusing on is doing lineage for that report. And then we do lineage for the next report. Now, there will be some overlap, so we will actually get to reuse some of the effort that we've already put into that first report. So you get into a cycle of diminishing effort, but increasing value. So each report that you add gives you more and more of the picture of your organization, but it gives you small wins to show that you're able to achieve this. If I again move to another analogy, consider if we said that, we would only have the blueprint for half of the building. It would never be allowed, right? But you don't design the blueprint in one go. You separate it into its concerns. So here is my structural elements, here are my electrical elements, here are my plumbing elements. Now they do all coalesce together at the end, but they're done by different groups and each of those groups is able to prove success. And that's the way that I think. So no longer boiling the ocean, we start with boiling a kettle, right? We start with purpose, we start with focus, and that's how you deliver something which is sustainable.
See, understood. It will be good to start in a small way and iron out the processes before you actually extend them across. And because the greater that you focus on a single report, it quite possibly can actually meet the requirements and also understand what it takes to build the lineage for that and replicate them for the rest of the reports as you go.
Yeah, exactly. So build report backwards rather than kind of the source forwards.
See, do you always build it from the report to the source and then build the lineage and ensure that it is complete from source to the report as well? Do you always start with the end result? That's my question, Phil.
So I think with this, you want to have checks and balances. So you want to have both a bottom-up and a top-down approach. So coming back from the report gives you that purpose. It gives you a focus. It gives you the ability to trace that through the organization. But you want to validate that against the other side of the organization, which is having a more top-down view. So looking at lines of business, looking at products, etc. So you do want to have a check and balance. But for me, if you're looking at regulatory reporting, then you should always start with what do I need to deliver? Like, the regulator doesn't want to see every single thing. It wants to see the fields that it's asked for. So trace the fields that it's asked for. Work those out first.
Understood. For regulatory reporting, you would rather start with the report rather than from the source. Understood, Phil. See, typically regulatory reporting covers business, the risk and compliance team, the technology team, and within the technology team, the data. Typically, because data has in many organizations a separate leadership. Now, who do you start with? Who is the ideal candidate to promote this?
So excellent question, and I think again it comes down to that purpose. So there is certain actors who are involved in the process, and they all need to be on board with what we're trying to achieve. So this has to be that we're focusing on the risk and compliance areas, because they're the ones who ultimately are responsible for the regulatory reports, right? They're the ones who have to comply and are in trouble if they don't comply. So they are a critical business to engage. They're the people who have the the why. Why are we doing this? They understand the problem. Now, you still need to engage with technology and with the data, because you've still got to identify the elements, the inputs to, so the what to the why. And so you must engage with technology and with the data organization, because as you said, this isn't just a siloed piece. This goes across the business. So for me, it's always engage with the person who is going to jail if it goes wrong first, and then engage with the technologists and with the data teams to make this successful.
Understood. See, Phil, do you foresee that at some point in time there will be a lineage which could be grafted or adapted by the banks, which are tailored for different reports and different regulations?
Yeah, so I see a world, and I hope this is the world that we get to, where we have the lineage across an organization that is a blueprint of that organization, right? So it gives you all of the inputs to what is required for the regulation. So it doesn't just give you, which is what we've focused on mostly in the past, and still is a significant focus on the technical bits that go into the report. It doesn't focus on connecting those technical bits to the reason that we're asking for it. So the regulation itself, the organization's internal policies, the different business units that are intersecting the product. So what we should have is a blueprint where we can say, not just for regulatory reporting purposes, but for any purpose, I would like to see across my organization my FX data flows. And I want to see those intersecting with what's in the cloud versus what's on-prem, or what's in this cloud versus that cloud. We want to be able to have this clear and transparent, sustainable view of an organization that is effectively driving the organizational change. So it becomes the design area as well. So if someone wants to change the organization, they make the changes in their lineage diagrams, they do the impact analysis, they push those tests across the organization, and then they make a change. So we're 100% confident that we're not going to break our regulatory reporting obligations. And hopefully over time, we're able to get in a position the same way that the building industry has, that every person who is using the data across the organization has implicit trust in it. So they're not worried that if they walk into a building, it's going to fall down like we are with data, right? Can I trust this data? Is it sufficient quality? Can I use it for this purpose? All of those questions should be able to be gone away by having a well-defined, well-standardized set of visual representations of the interactions that occur in the bank. So even more than just lineage, right? This is not just the technical, this is the business level. So there's several layers that we want to understand in lineage. It's not just the technical. There is, the logical, the conceptual, the business layer. All of those should be modeled within an organization.
See, just catching from there, Phil, typically most organizations would have put a workflow and a workflow engine along with the controls, especially on the regulatory and compliance side. Now, does the lineage platform draw upon that, or it is done independent of that?
No, so lineage has to have the intersect with controls. You've got to see where you have a control in place and what that control is effectively protecting as a stream of data. If you don't, then what you have is you have control gaps where you're not able to assess or understand that if someone puts bad data or incorrect data into this field, will it mess up my regulatory report, right? So controls are critical to that impact analysis. Equally with lineage, you should be thinking about intersecting it with quality. So can I test the quality of the flow of data that I have through here? So can I see where a file doesn't get delivered on time and so therefore isn't picked up into a batch run, which then means that the report that comes out the end is incorrect? Can I see whether that report is going to my regulator, to my customer, or if it's just internal, right? So that impact analysis and assessment, again, is part of that, but it's an intersect of the controls, the quality, ownership. So there's several different dimensions that we should be considering lineage against. Lineage is, the plumbing underneath, but we want to see over the top, the business challenges. So, for example, cost is one of those which we could overlay against a lineage to look at whether we've got very expensive systems, whether we've got systems which are, much more cheap to run. How do we optimize for that? You can intersect things like, lines of business, how many people work in this department, etc. So lineage should be a tool for optimization as much as it is for, for regulatory reporting, if you intersect with the right set of business information.
See, Phil, my question was around on what you would base the lineage on, whether you would base it on the workflow engines already implemented by the risk and compliance team, or it will be part with ETL and part with the workflow engines, or how is it done?
Right. So really, lineage should be drawn from multiple sources. So lineage is and has to interact with the underlying data stores, so where data is persisted. It needs to interact and intersect with the data movements in an organization, so the transformations that are occurring. So you mentioned ETL, 100%. Lineage needs to be coming from ETL. Equally, it needs to be coming and it needs to be understood about APIs and microservices. We don't just move data in organizations through ETL. There's enterprise service buses we need to be intersecting. So any application or any technology that is moving data should be part of a lineage capture. Anywhere where data is stored and held equally should be part of that lineage capture. So the lineage tooling, the capabilities need to sit above these technologies. Each of those technologies should be presenting both metadata and lineage to a system which is able to centralize that information, connect it all together, and give that visibility. So each of those are inputs into an overall, lineage and metadata application.
While you said that, Phil, it also means that you would have data lineage by different components in the regulatory reporting space. For example, there would be a data store, it would have its own lineage, and there would be a regulatory reporting platform which would have its own lineage. Now, will it overlay on top of all of this and provide end-to-end lineage from source to the reporting?
Exactly. So what you've got is there is different technologies which have different levels of lineage capability. Some, the more modern pieces of technology are being built with metadata and lineage in mind. So a lot of regulatory reporting systems will give you single hop from warehouse to regulatory report. Now that's critical, but it's a single hop. We need all the other hops. So we need to be able to join those with the lineage for system to system. And now some systems, like, if you've got advanced data platforms, which have stored procedures, et cetera, so there is actually lineage going on within that platform. So it's pulling data from tables, it's manipulating them, it's putting them into different views, and then it's extracting those and putting those into reports, and those reports are then being moved into, an extract into another table or another system, et cetera. So we need to capture all of that, because it's like a fence. If you have a missing piece of the fence or a missing chain, a link in the chain, it's effectively almost useless, because you don't have the credibility, the trust in, I don't know what this bit is missing, so I don't know what's happening there. So wherever you've got a black box component, that introduces a lack of understanding, a lack of ability to trust that what is happening there is what should be happening there. And so you've got to make sure that you link up end to end across the organization to deliver what the regulators are asking for, but equally what the organization wants, which is good, trusted, complete, consistent data.
Very good. See, does it mean, Phil, that a good lineage platform should have integration to the ETL tools, the databases, the data platforms, as well as regulatory reporting platforms in order to be successful?
So I think the answer is yes. So for me, there is lineage technologies which connect to certain parts of the ecosystem and focus on, just a subset. But for regulatory reporting, especially in financial services, where you have a very, very complex estate of varying technologies, that connectivity to those sources, or the ability to take the sources and ingest them. So some sources will not enable you to programmatically, automatically connect to them. So unfortunately for us, there will always be a manual element to this. But as long as we can draw the picture, as long as we can create the linkages, as long as we understand what is occurring, it doesn't matter whether it's manual or whether it's automatic. It's an architect still draws the blueprint. He has a tool to help him draw it, to make him better at drawing it, more standardized, more accurate, but he still draws it. He's still putting input into it. So in lineage, it's the same thing. We still need to have the human involvement. But yes, you need to be able to link up to all of these systems. There is if you want to make this sustainable and something that is into a BAU process that isn't just a snapshot in time, then you want to have it linked all together.
Understood. See, just a thought occurs as you were saying this, Phil. This is of interest not only to the bank, but also to the supervisors. At any point in time where you engage with the supervisors in establishing why banks should implement this as part of their technology stack?
Yes, so we're constantly trying to talk to both the banks and the regulators, because in reality everybody wants the same thing. They just have different focuses, different stakes in the game. So we're talking to regulators to try and ensure that they have the right capabilities within their organizations, because you've got to remember that a regulator is receiving a lot of data from a lot of their customers, right? So the banks. So they need to have data lineage, data management capabilities on their side to be able to take that data, connect that data, and make sense of that data. So there needs to be a maturity, not just from the banks, but there needs to be maturity from the regulators as well. And as we've evolved through this process, I think the asks from the regulators have changed. So, there was lots of, when BCBS 239 first came out, focus on quality. So looking at, running profiling of data sets to ensure that we have, the right quality, etc. And really with that, it gave a focus to let's try and remediate the data quality issues, not let's address the problem at source, like why is the issue there? So, you mentioned earlier controls, right? It's if I put the control in place, then I can stop the data quality issue from occurring. If you have a postcode validator on a website and it validates your postcode before you click the purchase button, the seller is much more confident in the quality of their data because they know that data has been matched against a record set. They know it is accurate, right? They know it's not a random series of digits. That means that their quality is much higher and they'll be able to deliver much more effectively. If they didn't have that quality control in place, then their ability to deliver would be greatly reduced. So I think the focus is shifting towards this sustainability now rather than just the remediation bit. Obviously, quality is of course important, but we're really trying to get to the source of the problems, making sure that there is controls and validations at the start of the chain, not just kind of quality checks at the end of the chain.
See, you mentioned all along about the issues with regard to how do we track and ensure the quality of data and have the necessary controls in place. Equally important is to how do you actually make sure that it is complying with the regulation is concerned. And now that the digital regulations have come in, is there a way to marry this lineage with the regulatory lineage part?
Yeah, so it's an excellent question, and I think in the past I would say no, there wasn't capability to be able to match the two together, but I think more and more now there is. So you can link regulations, so you can see the why as well as the what to report. And you can link those two together because context is really the important thing. Exactly. Someone understanding why they have to report something and then what they need to report means that they'll be able to report that much more accurately. And so, yes, that capability is now available and is being embraced, I think, for organizations that are certainly forward thinking and thinking about like, how do we really reduce spend in this area? How do we make sure that this is a sustainable endeavor? We really need to understand the impacts from both sides, not just the field that I need to report, but the why I need to report it. So if either of those change, I can see what the impact on the business is.
So it would capture not only the system changes, but also the changes in the interpretation of the regulation, because many cases banks do make interpretation. It is not everything black and white, and those interpretations might undergo change depending upon whether the supervisor comes back to them.
Well, 100%. So this is exactly the point is, so you've got machine readable regulation, which we're hoping will become kind of standard and ubiquitous across industry. So that's great. But as you said, a regulation is there and it has interpretation against the organization that is being regulated by it. So, HSBC's regulations, as they apply to them, are different to Deutsche Bank's regulations and how they apply to them. So they are interpreted by the internals of the organization. So what you need to capture is not only the why, so the regulatory why, you then need to capture the internal policy, that interpretation of what that means for us. Exactly. And then you've got to link those two things together. And then you need to link from the what it means to us as a policy to how do we enact that policy? Do we link it to process? So we have to link this to say, well, these are the processes that I undertake in order to deliver against that policy which I've stated. And then there's sets of technology which are associated with those processes. So you start to build a much more holistic, connected map of the organization from a regulatory perspective. And that's really the end state that we're certainly trying to get to, is that we want people to have that, that end to end. If a regulation changes, I can see how it affects my interpretation. I can see how it affects my processes. I can see how it affects my technology. I can see how it affects my business. I can see how it affects my reporting. But equally, if my organization changes, so let's say that we pull out of a region or we stop trading a particular set of products, I should be able to see what regulations I am no longer bound by, where I no longer need to have policy for. And so therefore I can streamline my compliance to remove those, because I'm no longer required to comply with those regulations. I don't operate in that jurisdiction, or I don't operate against those products. That means that we can be much more efficient as an organization, rather than we've got all these regulations, we used to be governed by them, so we still just go through the process of reporting against them because we're not sure whether we need to comply or not.
See, Phil, from our own experience, when we start engaging with banks, as I told in the beginning, there is a lot of interest to build the lineage. But then when it finally comes to the decision making, they actually start with the regulatory lineage rather than the data lineage part, because at least that has a bounded elements together. It has to do with the regulatory reporting platform and the regulatory source to be tied together, and then to the internal policies. And it stays within the risk and compliance team of the bank, and it is still not moving into the domain of the business. And we are finding it hard to break the jinx. While we have done this, how do we actually now take it to the next level of building the data lineage to support them? Have you also faced the same thing? And if you have been able to succeed, what is it that you have done to convince them to go through the whole path?
Yes, it's a great question, and I think when we think about it, the banks are under huge regulatory pressure. They have so many new regulations to deal with that it's often, how can we get through these as quickly and as cheaply as possible, because this is taking spend away from where we could be innovating on product and where we could be, able to increase our profit margin or reduce our operating kind of costs. So it becomes seen as a very negative thing. So lineage is something you have to do because the regulator told you to do it, as opposed to really changing that view. And I think this is where we've been successful, is really changing that view into be much more of a, this is how you create a sustainable, efficient organization. This is how you enable yourself to be a market leader. And that is by creating an organization that understands itself, that is able to impact itself, and is able to therefore make change much more quickly, and be able to operate much more efficiently. So for us, lineage, the regulatory piece is a nice driver to take non-discretionary spend, but that non-discretionary spend should be spent in a way which actually improves the organization's efficiency or ability to earn money. And so I think that's where we've been the most successful, is really getting that message to be well understood, for people to really see how they can optimize their organization. I mean, just reducing operational redundancy of data, removing or increasing time to market by ability to be able to grant access to data more quickly. These are all things which drive revenue or save costs. So now we've moved away from the thing which the bank doesn't want to do, which is spend lots of money on regulation, to do what it does want to do, which is spend money on being more efficient and increasing P&L. So I think that's the real driver for us, is always focusing on the business value, not the regulatory compliant need.
See, Phil, two things which we found as the blocks coming in the way from the bank side. One is, if something is working, they don't want to touch that, and they want to continue with that. Status quo, they do know that there are issues, but they are not too much to deal with the regulator, and therefore let it stay as it is. The second, we found that the risk and compliance team in particular is not so in favor of automation and systematically having a record of the flows. While they aspire for quality, they really think the quality comes through quality workforce rather than quality systems. I'm not sure whether you have also experienced those two blocks in your journey.
Yeah, so I think the answer is definitely yes. I think what you have is kind of, as you mentioned, there's twofold. So the first, if we're focusing on a single area, and sorry, let's go back to the first one. So the first one is, is it really working? So they say it's working, but is it really working? If it was really working, then the regulators wouldn't be providing and pushing down so many consent orders and MRAs and all of the regulatory oversight. So for me, the answer is it's not working. It's broken. It's been broken for a long time. So I think there is we need to pull our head out of the sand and not deny what we all know is true, is that we've built very, very complex data estates, application estates, which we're still constantly changing and which aren't fit for a sustainable purpose, right? We need to at least make that admission that there is so much better we could do. And a lot of organizations are doing this by, moving to the cloud and trying to re-architect and redesign what they've built to modernize their estate. So there is acceptance, but I don't think it's across the entire of the organizations yet. But I think that's the first step, is what we're doing isn't working. If it was, we wouldn't have had 2007, 2008, the crash. We wouldn't be having kind of so much uncertainty in our data estates. We would have trust in our data, and we would just be able to operate very efficiently. We're not in that place. The second is, look, I agree that there should always be a human element to this. The data that flows through our databases, through our data lakes, our warehouses, etc., is one piece of the puzzle. But data without context is really, it's not as valuable. So without the metadata that describes it and gives it purpose, then we're really missing a trick. And so a lot of that information still is stuck in people's heads. Now, we want people to document it and to put it into systems that can, catalog it and capture it and really keep it for the organization. So if that person who has the knowledge leaves, that the organization is still able to operate, right? How many organizations have a spreadsheet where nobody knows what it does, but they still use it? It's quite scary how many there are in operation where there is no understanding of what it actually does, but people keep using them and pressing the button, and the number comes out right, so we're happy. Like, we need to move away from that. We need to get this information captured into our organization. The intellectual property needs to be stored. But equally, we don't want to create unnecessary manual intervention if possible, right? We should be able to, using technology, link these things together to create that foundational blueprint, right? The things, the pipes on which our data flows and where it resides, that should be a given. That should be our base expectation. There shouldn't be an organization that doesn't have that, because we're building complex things. You don't build complex things without having a base level understanding blueprint. It's impossible to do well, to do sustainably. So, and every other engineering discipline has learnt this. You look at mechanical engineering, structural engineering, civil engineering, chemical engineering. Everybody knows that if you want to build complex things, you really need to understand all of the components and how they interact. It's a base thing.
See, in fact, Phil, when we engage with banks, we lay three foundations. The first block is about the data model. The second thing is about the data lineage. And the third part is about the regulatory lineage. If we can bring the three together and can create a common repository in place, then that whole system is codified and available for people to view at any given point in time. Nobody disputes those. Nobody disputes those. But as I told you, there is a view that this is going to take a very long term to execute, especially since it traverses the entire business line and front to back offices. And therefore, there is a reluctance to see where to begin. And like you said, we also begin with the report. We take that, let's actually work on a given report and try to build that model upwards. If these three foundations are good for a report, then we will actually replicate for the class. And from the class, we will go down to either the jurisdiction or to the regulation for completeness. But see, that leap of faith, which is there for several other things, seems to be missing so wholeheartedly in this space. Phil, I'm not sure whether you have also had a very similar experience.
100%. I think, look, we've been burned in the past. We've tried to do this, and we've tried to do it in the wrong way with the wrong tools. That's, for me, the thing. Everyone has a story to tell about a failed attempt at doing this, and I think the landscape has changed. You know, we see clients who are pumping tens of millions of attributes into our technology, you know, and linking them all together and making progress against, you know, being able to deliver on regulatory reports in weeks. It's, if you use the right approach, if you use the right tool, the job can be done safely, quickly, and be built to be sustainably. It's like trying to, you know, I think in the old way we were doing it, we were trying to take a screwdriver to chop down a tree. So, you know, eventually it can be done, but you've lost interest well before you get there. The point is, if you have a chainsaw, it's much quicker. You've got the right tool, you've got the person who knows how to use that tool, the tree comes down very quickly. And the same is in this space. I think we've all been burned, but this is something that has to happen. We can't shy away from it. The organizations that shy away from it will be left behind. The organizations that embrace this, that understand that data lineage, the metadata of their organization is the lifeblood of their organization. You know, the data in the tables, everyone thinks the data in the tables is the valuable thing. It's actually the metadata that describes what's in there. Now, all of the technology first organizations understand this implicitly, and so have built by default and by design lineage, metadata management, data management into their base capabilities. The organizations, so banks who have the legacy estate, and it's not just banks, it's lots of organizations that have grown by merger acquisition, that have grown organically rapidly. They have a much bigger challenge because they've got a legacy estate which they need to retrofit. The key is you don't have to retrofit all of it. You have to retrofit the bits which are important to your business and the bits which are changing. So you've got to do a really focused prioritization on what you hit first and why you hit it first. But as I said, right tool, right approach, this can be done. We've done it. It's sustainable. It doesn't cost you a lot. It becomes a BAU process that is part of your organizational change, and it's achievable.
Phil, you mentioned right tools and right people, and especially something which traverses the entire organization means the tools should be capable of being used by the business teams, the regulatory teams, and the IT teams together. Do you really think data lineage platforms have matured enough to be easily usable by the three groups?
Yeah, it's a great question because most tools are built for two of those groups. They're built for the IT group and they're built for the data group. And I think there is unfortunately still very few platforms which can cater for all three groups. There is platforms that do this. We specifically, when we built ours, was focused on a business user must be able to interact with this. Otherwise, it will not gain the adoption we need across the business for it to be truly part of their process. And so you've really got to focus when designing the product to make it as easy as possible to use. If we're expecting to replace Excel, it needs to be as easy as Excel. It needs to be more powerful than Excel, but it needs to be as easy as Excel or as Visio, right? That's for me, that's the base level that we need to make sure we're getting to, because everyone is comfortable with Excel generally in financial services. And so like you've got to design intuitively, you've got to design something. And I kind of have the analogy of, when Windows 95 first came out, it came out with a manual which had hundreds of pages. It was a very simple operating system, but it had hundreds of pages of manual. Now, when you get an iPhone, you don't get a manual, and yet you can use it. And it's a much more complex operating system. Why? Because it's built to be intuitive. Now, it's difficult to build intuitive software. It takes longer. But if you focus on that as your primary, then you are able to achieve something which means it can be used by anybody very, very quickly. So trained in hours, not trained in weeks or months.
See, Phil, I definitely believe in that, because if it is something which is to cut across these different groups with different technical talents, and the tool becomes the central guiding force for them. And if it is usable by all the groups, all the more better, and therefore you can actually see a way forward in that. Now, it has been a very positive discussion so far, Phil, and I really want you to spend a little time. What would be your advice to the regulatory and the IT teams of the bank in terms of how to move forward with confidence on the data lineage part?
Yeah, excellent question. So I think for me, we've got to think big. So we've got to think about, what kind of future are we trying to build? What does a regulator actually want? Why are they asking? They're not asking us to study for exams and then be able to give the right answers for one day. They want us to always have the right answers. They want us to know. So think big. This isn't let's focus on regulatory reporting and just regulatory reporting, because that narrows the focus to reduce what we can achieve. But I think start small. So start small and prove value. The business doesn't want to waste money on something which is not going to be able to evidence success quickly. So you've got to be able to prioritize very focusedly to get down to, this is going to be something which we can achieve, and we can achieve it in this time frame, and then we can move on. So again, think big, start small, and then that start small is to create a pattern which is repeatable, and then repeat that pattern across the organization. Once you've got a repeatable pattern means sustainability, it means automation, and you can therefore get into a place where this is just part of how your organization operates, and it's not something that sits over the top as an obligation. It sits at the bottom as a capability, right? So we don't want it to be sitting on top as the obligation. We want it to be sitting as something which we are capable of doing as just as part of business. And I think that's what I would suggest to everyone.
Thank you so much, Phil. Thank you so much. And I think if I were to pick some from yours, I would pick that start small, but have the big picture in mind. And more importantly, this is something is not only for regulator, it is for the organization, that they have a codified lineage which will make their own change programs much more effective, easier, and secure. And those are my takeaways.
I probably missed one, and the one that I missed actually is probably the most important one. The most important one is start. Do something. Don't do nothing. Doing nothing means you're going backwards.
Correct.
Start.
Start.
Have to start.